Hello and welcome to AleksTabletops MTG Set Study episode 140 or 140 part 1. So this is Buddy, my name is Alex, and from now on we're going to increase the number of episodes per month of MTG Set Studies, and because of this I basically created this part 1 and part 2 thing. So for this week is going to be only MTG Set Studies, so today, Tuesday, and on Friday there's also going to be MTG Set Studies part 2. So basically this is going to be a continuation of the session, but just a part 2. The reason behind this is just basically a specific from my personal reasons, because as I said before, like my MTG Study Set Studies episodes are tied to my regular Season 6 MTG Study English episodes, so as long as 140 session out there, there's also the same number of sessions like has to be in MTG Set Studies. So because of this like weird thing that I created for myself in order to somehow not get confused with the number of sessions for the sake of convenience, and also it's kind of like shows where exactly those MTG Set Studies were created during the actual MTG Arena play study seasons. It basically kind of creates this good timeline that helps me to understand which seasons we actually studied Magic more in the game, and which seasons we studied Magic during basically regular set studies. So it just basically helps me to maintain this balance. So let me check the sound quickly. That helps me to understand. Sound works good. So let's just go. So yeah, without further ado, let's just go. We don't have that much time. For about an hour, we'll see. It all depends how successful is going to be the study itself. If I feel like it, I may extend the session more than an hour, but in most cases for now I'm going to keep all sessions on AleksTabletops under an hour, because this is just the way that I need to do things right now, because for now I want to make sure that the creative part is going to be my primary part, and AleksTabletops is going to play like a secondary kind of thing. So because of this, I don't want to overdo things when it comes down to the games, and especially to this thing. So yeah, previously we finished with Antiquities before the hiatus, and now I'm back and we're basically continuing. Finished with Antiquities, and now we're basically moving to the revised. So the revised edition is not necessarily a new set. This is basically kind of a revised edition of Alphabet Unlimited, Arabian Nights, and maybe Antiquities. So there is a good chance that we will encounter a lot of similar cards. The problem is I'm probably not going to separate them as similar because I don't want to. I'm probably not going to view them as similar because we studied those cards a long time ago. So I started with Alphabet Unlimited probably at the beginning of this year, and now it's almost the end of the year, and I'm definitely not going to remember all cards that we studied throughout these 3 sets. So because of this, revised edition is kind of going to be somewhat actually a revised edition. We might actually end up with similar mechanics. We may find something new, or we maybe could go and quickly review everything and basically not find anything else. We'll see. So without further ado, let's just go and start. So this set officially has 306 cards, but in search it showed 296. I don't know like why this is the case, because sometimes it just basically not shows all cards. So is with previous sets. Like for instance, when we studied Antiquities, it was not 100 cards but 96, I believe. The same goes with Arabian Nights, and with Alphabet Unlimited it was probably lesser cards, but still, it doesn't matter. So yeah, so again, as a reminder how we're working with MTG Set Studies, we usually basically reading the card, we understanding if we need to add this new ability of the card, if it's something new that we never saw before, or something that I see potential in. I'm basically adding it somewhere right here, which is basically the place. We try to make this new mechanic as general as possible, and once we will make it general, like as possible, we also could add certain specifications to it. If we don't need specifications, we just leave it at that. So throughout the process, if you're not familiar with it, you will familiar with it if you're interested in that. The whole idea, as a reminder, to do this is to set up the base for me to learn similar games as Magic, basically study Magic as one of the biggest games of its kind, one of the most complex games of its kind, and based on that basically create a base of knowledge that will allow me in the future to create my own tabletop games, or basically similar card games in digital, which I have planned for, but again, it might happen, it might not happen, but again, the only thing that I can do is basically study, and this is exactly what I'm doing. I'm studying Magic. The whole idea is to basically study all sets right from the beginning. It's going to take quite some time, and it's understandable because there's a lot of sets. I mean, we're still in a vintage era, as I called it. Personally, vintage era is going to end. Let's see where it's going to end. I established vintage era probably up until there's a lot of sets in vintage era. Scourge. I don't know why it's two of them. One of them probably should be deleted. Either way, and starting from core set 8, for me this is a new era of Magic because they completely changed the style of the cards. And from now on, I actually am much more familiar with cards, because it doesn't mean that I started from set 8, but set 8 edition was the first set that I actually paid a lot of attention to, and from that set I knew quite a lot of cards from Meridian, from Darksteel, from Fifth Dan, etc., from Kamigawa, and etc. So basically for me this is kind of a modern style sets, although it's not necessarily modern at that point. And also we have a contemporary style set, which is everything till the current set. Of course, after Magic 19 we also had a lot of new sets, M12, 2 Ravnica sets or something like this, and also is going to be a new set, Throne of Eldraine. So we will get to that at some point. For now, we're not considering this. We're also not considering modern sets either. For now, we're sticking to somewhat kind of a boring maybe sets because they're not necessarily relevant. But at the same time, I'm kind of interested in what I could get from them, because the explanation of the mechanics of the previous sets are pretty old, and you have to kind of, I don't know, think how they could apply at this era. So either way, let's just continue. So again, we're going to start today with the new set. Again, this is not necessarily a new set, this is just a revised division of the previous sets. It has quite a lot of cards, 3 pages of cards. It's going to take quite a lot of time, so let's just go. Hopefully we will encounter a lot of similar cards that we already saw before, and we're not going to spend too much time on one card or whatever. So, but again, the whole point is not to haste into it, because I'm planning to do this only once. Once I will study all sets like live during the streams. After that, I will go through the drafts of each set. We will reread all mechanics. We will try to put those mechanics into our first draft, which is going to be separated by a specific here it is. Yeah, which is going to be separated by specific, yeah, this is kind of a first strike, with specific, I don't know, similarities of how these abilities could work. For instance, like cumulative-based mechanics is going to be somewhere in here. Card interactions in between, like in between card interactions, is going to be here. Like roll side dice or other random generator mechanics are going to be here, and etc. Then after we will finish with the first draft, we will go with the second draft, and we'll try to find similarities between all those mechanics and etc. So I don't know how many drafts we're going to go through. It's going to take a while. I'm not planning to go super fast through it. It's probably going to take years and years and years. So I'm not planning to finish it like in 1 or 2 years. It's probably going to be at least 5 years of studying. But hopefully, since now I added 2 new episodes, two more episodes per month with MTG Sets studies, if nothing is going to arise in my life that could like distract me from studying these sets, I'm planning on constantly studying at least 4 sessions per month, MTG Set studies, and play Magic at least 4 sessions per month. And by doing so, basically, I'm hopefully will go a little bit faster with set studying, and we will finish with this much quicker. Because once I will finish with those sets and we will go through the drafts, this is kind of will tell me where exactly I am in terms of creating my own stuff, because then I will try to use this experience that I gained from creating those things and creating my own stuff. And also, quick note, I know that there's a lot of sites that already have Magic the Gathering studied from me, like, I mean, for me. So instead of me just studying this, I could basically use sites that already have separated mechanics, separated like abilities, and etc. But again, the reason why I'm doing this on my own, it's not necessarily I'm trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm just trying to do the study my own way. I'm trying to see the things the way that I want to see them. I want to analyze those things the way that my brain is interpreting them, not necessarily the way that others people's brains could interpret it. And I'm not trying to make it, I'm not trying to study it from the point of becoming a better Magic player. I'm studying for different purpose, for my own personal purpose. So because of this, the only one that can do this is me. So because of this, it just seems like a logical thing for me to study it, although it will take quite a lot of time. So yeah, so let's just go, because again, I don't want to talk too much about these things. Just because we took quite a bit of a hiatus, I just decided to, since we will start from episode 140. Each episode is going to have 2 parts. I decided to basically renew the information why exactly I'm doing this, because sometimes it's just like if you, for instance, find this video on YouTube, you probably not even will understand why I'm doing this. You would probably could see this as a waste of time. So, and I just wanted to explain for those who potentially might be interested in that. And what you can get from this is probably just, if you're interested in creating your own stuff too, if you're interested in understanding card mechanics, and if you're interested in like trying to, I don't know, then use this information to create something on your own, you could do this with me and basically analyze this and help to basically set this base and maybe understand card games a little bit better on yourself, and then apply this knowledge to create your own stuff too, which is pretty cool. And also, it's going to be much more interesting once I will start to create my own games. I will also do this in kind of a live stream format, and I'm going to test them, I'm going to make them better, I'm going to work on abilities, and it's going to be much more interesting once all this information is already intact, which is pretty cool. So yeah, that's it. So again, let's just go. So Air Elemental, flying, just regular creature with flying. We covered all abilities in that mostly Magic has. We have them in our... yeah, we have a lot of information. It's already kind of intimidates me to a certain degree, how much information we already have, and this is just like a beginning, which is crazy. I mean, this intellectual map will become bigger and bigger and bigger. It's not going to become smaller. Maybe up like after first draft, second draft, it will become a little bit more maybe organized, but not necessarily smaller. But for now, basically, we have actual mechanics of Magic, which is again, flying is here, lifelink is here. Most of these regular mechanics we already covered, at least the ones that I encountered. The new ones that we will encounter, especially from new sets, we will definitely put them in here at some point. And also we have our frequently used abilities, which don't have names. In most cases, those abilities are just something that Magic like repeats from set to set, or from block to block at least, and we see them on a constant basis. So for instance, like whenever a creature leaves the battlefield, something will happen. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, something will happen. This is not necessarily a mechanic, I mean, but this is a frequently used ability that Magic has, so we're basically putting something like this in here. This is just a review of how we're working with those things, because there's just a lot of information. And our basic, just regular study is in here. When every new information that we're finding, we add it here, and everything that kind of works similar with frequently used mechanics or actual Magic mechanics, we will add here. It's basically the way that this process is going. Just as a review for those who are not familiar with this. So, okay, Aladdin's Lamp. So this is an artifact. It costs pretty much, like, a lot, 10. Also, you can pay X amount of your choice. Tap it. The next time you would draw a card this turn, instead look at the top X cards of your library, put all but one of them on the bottom of your library in random order, then draw a card. X can be 0. So it's clear why X can be 0. This is kind of a restriction that balances things out, because you might use this to pay this card, tap it, and basically trigger a certain ability of artifacts in order to restrict this kind of artifacts from being used in a weird way. They set up this probably thing. Also, you're not going to be able to draw X cards, of course. So the next time you would draw a card this turn, so again, you could draw a card multiple ways. You could draw a card at the beginning of your upkeep, after your upkeep on a draw step. You also can draw a card with special cards that will help you to draw additional cards. So whenever you draw a card this turn, instead of drawing it, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount that you paid before. Put all but one of them on the bottom of your library in a random order, then draw a card. So, which means that we're basically choosing a card. This is not necessarily a good, like, you choose one of them and the rest will put on the bottom of your library, and then you will draw this one that you chose. So basically, ideally, what you, in terms of the actions that you take here, instead of drawing a card, you look at the top X cards of your library. Let's just assume that this is 3 cards. So we paid 3, we're tapping it, we're looking at 3 cards of our from the top of our library, then we're putting all but one of them on the bottom of our library in random order. Again, we're taking 2 of them, one of them we're leaving, and that one that we left, it doesn't necessarily dictate where exactly this card is going. Apparently it just goes back on top of our library, and then we're drawing that card. Because, yeah, it's quite an interesting mechanic. I don't know, it basically replaces the regular action, like drawing a card, with a different but similar action that helps us to take advantage of this ability. It kind of boosts the ability of just a regular draw into something like scrying, like Scry 3 or something like this, which is actually pretty cool. So ideally it actually works like scrying, but the artifact itself works completely different. So this seems like a new ability. We don't have that one, so let's just put it in here. Try to generalize it and try to specify it. Like again, specifications are usually going to be something that will help me to understand where I could use this besides, for instance, drawing cards. So for instance, in specifications, usually I will add that draw a card. Like the next time you would do something, instead of drawing a card, basically I could put anything in here. Let's put it keyboard a little bit closer. The next time you would draw a card, could be anything. Could be any action, any in-game action. Also, for now, I'm putting those terminologies like any in-game action, outside of the game action. For now, those terminologies are based on the information that I'd already studied. So most of this information actually came from unsets. We studied all unsets, and when we studied unsets, I encountered a lot of problems with actions inside of the game and outside of the game. So basically, in-game actions, this is something that involves the card interactions. Involves the actions that basically performed within the game rules, regular magic rules. Outside of the game and actions, this is something that basically forces a player to do something outside of the game. So for instance, unsets had a lot of abilities that basically forces opponent to touch a nose or close their eyes or choose the color of their, I don't know, specific creature based on their color of their clothes. So this is outside of the game action. In-game action, this is something that basically already set within the rules of Magic. So because of this, in most cases I'm working with in-game action. But of course, if we will try to come up with something unique and interesting, we could change that at any time. But for now, we're going to stick to that. So the next time you would draw a card, drawing a card basically could be anything. It could be any in-game action. This is kind of a first specification. Let's just go pay X. We're not going to set the variable tap, which is again a price for using this artifact. Also, let's just establish that this is an artifact, because if I don't understand what this ability is tied to, like I might not understand what this is. Maybe this is an instant. If this is an instant, it's going to play it a little bit differently than an artifact, because it's not a permanent artifact. Of course, so the creatures and lands are permanent, so because of this they're going to work a little bit differently. So we need to establish the type of card, which is basically artifact. Ideally we could actually put not necessarily an artifact, let's just put a permanent in here. So we may pay X, we may tap permanent, because how could you tap a permanent inside of your hand, like in your hand, like you're holding your cards in your hand, and then you have to tap them in your hand. It just seems weird. Of course, it implies that they have to already be on the table. So pay X, tap. The next time you would draw a card this turn. Again, we also have a specification this turn. So that means that this is limited by a specific time or a specific turn, tied to a specific turn structure, because we could get rid of the turn and actually make it like the next 2 turns or the next upkeep or whatever. So basically we could set different time frames for this ability to be utilized, and also modify that parameter of this ability. Instead, look at the top X cards of your library, put all but one of them on the bottom of your library in random order, then draw a card, and X can be 0. So we're going to keep this ability the way that it is, because it's kind of it is as general as possible. I don't want to change it. One thing that we're going to add a lot of specification to it. Not necessarily one thing, but we're going to add a lot of specifications to it. So the first specification is draw a card could be anything. So this is the first thing that we're going to change. The second thing that we're going to change is the turn structure. This turn. Again, this turn could be any time frame. And most of the abilities, I'm looking at them this way. So I'm viewing this ability like as it is, but then I'm trying to think of this ability, okay, what this ability could be also. Like how to extend this ability outside of its original purpose, and how to make it as, I don't know, diverse as possible, maybe. Like then we also have like instead. So instead, what I want to add instead, so there's two instances when it goes down with extend. So extend could be a upgraded version of the original action, and also instead could be a opposite version of the original action, or basically could be anything, truly. I mean, instead of drawing a card, you will lose a life, or you will gain a life. So let's just go with not with opposite, but just basically different version of the original action. Different version. No. Let me rephrase it. Instead, could be different from the original action. From the original action. Yeah. Instead could be also could be a different from the original action. So when it comes down to the same, like to the upgraded version of the original actions, we talking about this example. This example, we have drawing a card, which is again looking basically drawing a card from the top of your library. So the action is working with the library itself. So now we're going to find something similar that it goes with looking through the library. So, and now we're replacing it with something much more upgraded. And in this particular instance is look at the top X cards of your library, which is basically allows us to, instead of just drawing the top card of the library, look at the certain amount of cards on top of our library and choose what we want to keep, so to say. And then we're going to draw exactly that card. So this could be a upgraded version of the original action. And when it comes down to the, also could be a different from the original action. Again, instead of drawing a card, you could gain life. You could discard a card based on some type of criteria. So again, there's so many possibilities in here that my brain basically could explode right here. So we're not going to sit on that too much. So let's just establish the kind of parts of this mechanic or so-called ability that could potentially become a mechanic, because again, this is the reason why I'm calling them mechanics and special abilities, because sometimes they look more like a mechanic, sometimes they look like special abilities, but in the end they all could become a mechanic if we would want to, if we will desire to create a mechanic from them. Instead, look at the top X cards of your library, put all but one of them on the bottom of your library in random order, then draw a card. So the whole thing right here, like, instead, like, all this information, it's basically could be replaced. So this is just a explanation of the actions that we need to take instead of just drawing a card. So because of this, we're probably not going to change it. Of course, the other thing that we could go is the restriction. X can be 0. We also could put any restrictions. Usually restrictions are created for the balance purposes. Mistakes in both words. One L here, and restrictions, probably too much. Restrictions, probably. Restrictions, yes. We also could put any restrictions on the price for the purpose of balance. That's it. So this is actually a pretty good start. We found a pretty awesome mechanic, like from the get-go, or special abilities that we created a lot of specifications. The most interesting thing about those mechanics are actually specifications for me personally, because mechanic could hold a certain potential inside of it, but only by understanding what specifications you could extract from it. This is exactly what helps you to extract those this potential, or at least direct you towards realizing the potential of this card, because this is not necessarily gave us all the potential of this card, but understand that we could replace the drawing a card and maintain the same structure of the mechanic or the ability. We could basically come up with so many varieties. That's just basically crazy. So yeah, these are all the things that we could go through, because like the separate thing by drawing a card, again, ideally I would rephrase that much simpler, but again, like instead of drawing a card, you in the end will end up drawing a card. So instead of it, you could just basically take this card in your hand right away. But the reason why it's kept right here, because the action of drawing a card, this is actually a specific action that triggers a lot of abilities in Magic. So taking a card from the top of our library in our hand, if ability reads that, this is not the same as drawing a card. This is a completely different action, because it reads differently. We're performing a different kind of action, although it seems like the same. In this particular instance, we're drawing a card, and the other instance, we're just taking card and looking at it and taking it into our hand, but not necessarily drawing it from. Like, so this is not the act of drawing, this is the act of taking. Doesn't matter. This is a nuance. So, Aladdin's Ring. So, by paying X and tapping, deals 4 damage to any target. Again, just kind of a permanent that also could deal damage to any target. We covered everything that works with damage dealing things just directly. The other damage dealers are much more profound in what they could target, how they could be triggered, and etc. We're not going to get into this because most of these things are kind of automatic. Maybe we'll encounter certain abilities that work with dealing the damage, but in most cases the pure act of dealing the damage is actually pretty simple. How you could complicate this is by basically adding the specification for the target, or remove any specification for the target, or create certain restrictions based on dealing this damage, or create certain unique things that could make dealing the damage easier or much more complex. Either way, continue. So, enchant artifact. So again, first this card is only can be used to enchant artifacts. As long as an enchanted artifact isn't a creature, it's an artifact creature with power and toughness, each equal to its converted mana cost. So pretty cool, pretty cool. So the question is, should we need to put this card in our intellectual map or not? Because the question is, it seems like a simple one, there's nothing complex to it. The only problem is that we basically turn any creature that is not an artifact, we turn an artifact that is not a creature into an actual creature. It's basically the act of changing cards I don't remember how to properly call it, but I believe I actually covered this. I had a lot of mechanics that actually work with changing the cards, specifically. Let me find it. So choice based, condition based. As long as a creature equipped, creatures of that type become gets a benefit. Control based, prize based, name text based, rules based, maybe rules based, no. No certain restriction from certain card in game action, mechanic or ability. Adds a certain restriction, each player keeps, no. Basically it's kind of a way of transforming a creature. So maybe a transformation seems like a good idea, like a transformation, because we actually covered like multiple ways of transforming. Let's just find it in not in the spell check. How much time we have? Snap, we don't have that much time. Again, at the beginning of studying each set, it will always start quite slow. What I wanted to do here, find transformation. So target spell or permanent becomes color of your choice. So yeah, something within those lines. I mean, shapeshifter also kind of works, but again, it's just basically can be any type of card. Creature has at the beginning. When shot creature dies, now deal damage. Set the limitation. The permanent becomes color of your choice. Card can be custom. Like, I don't know if I have this here or not. There's a possibility that I have, but in case that I don't have it, let's just add it. It's never going to be. Since we will go only once through this studying process, I'd rather have this or than not have it. So let's just add this information here. Just try to, and we're also going to generalize it as like as simple as possible, or as general as possible. We'll make it as general as possible. As long as enchanted artifact isn't a creature, so enchant permanent, and as long as enchanted permanent isn't a creature, it's a creature. Okay, it's quite complex thing. I mean, depending on the game itself, the permanent could be anything. In Magic, we have not that many type of permanents. We have enchantment, we have equipment, which is basically an artifact. So basically have artifacts, equipments, or artifacts, enchantments, creatures, enchantments, yeah, the aura enchantments is also permanent, and mana, the lands. So we have only choice right here in between land, artifact, and enchantment, but the thing that I'm trying to find is to generalize all of them. So it's a creature. Same type as it was. Same type of permanent as it was. So it's a creature. At the same time, this is the same type of permanent that it was, as it was. With power and toughness each equal to its converted mana cost. So yeah, one of the unique things right here that the power and toughness are measured by this creature, this card's converted mana cost, which is actually pretty cool. But if this is a land, it doesn't have mana cost, of course. So we need to find a way to kind of balance this thing out with specifications. So enchant permanent. So this ability, I believe, is, of course, it could be not just only enchant permanent. It could be not just an aura. It could play a role of sorcery or instant that we could put on a creature for temporary thinking. So enchant permanent, as long as enchanted permanent isn't a creature, it's a creature. It's a creature. Same type of permanent as it was. It's the same. The easiest way to just basically establish that it just becomes a creature and maintains the same type of permanent, like the same type, with power and toughness each equal to its counterparts. But it's still clear, I believe, even though it's not properly phrased, but still it's clear, for me at least. Permanent isn't a creature. Now it's a creature. Also same type of permanent as it was, with power and toughness each equal to its converted mana cost. So let's just establish that converted mana cost also could be anything. So converted mana cost could be replaced with different card characteristic. Yeah, different card characteristics is basically, for me personally, card characteristics, especially the way that I'm understanding them now at this point, this is a power and toughness, this is all basically visual characteristics of the card. The text in it, the number of words, and etc. So basically, what contains the card itself. So could be replaced with different card characteristics. So current mana cost, of course, it's considered, for me personally, is a card characteristic. So we could replace it with something different. So for instance, instead of tying this creature's power and toughness equal to its converted mana cost, we could tie it to something different. For instance, to which is crazy, to the number of cards in a collection. I forgot how, like in Magic, this part of the card called specifically, but basically each card has a certain number in a collection. Like for instance, first card from 245 cards and etc. Or something like this basically, and you could tie it to this specific characteristics. And also, if we're going to look past Magic, we could create our own characteristics for the cards and make those characteristics work within this mechanic, which is actually pretty cool. Also, enchant permanent could be, again, this card could play temporary role so as permanent role. So in this particular instance, it plays a permanent role as long as this creature stays alive. Once this creature dies, and this enchantment dies with it, basically will be put into a graveyard. But also we could consider a temporary role. Like for instance, instead of enchant, use like instant or sorcery, something that basically like a buff until next turn, until next 2 turns, or until certain conditions will be met, etc. So it basically could just basically play temporary role as a permanent role. Those two things will be enough for me to understand how to properly control it. So let's just move on, because we just started and we didn't edit that much into it. So hopefully the next cards will come a little bit faster. But again, I'm not trying to go as fast as possible, I'm just trying to go through cards, so sometimes it goes quite slow, so we could go through like first page for quite a bit. Again, speed right here is not important, it's what you will get from it, it's important, and I'm getting from it lots of things. And again, the reason why I'm streaming it, I understand that this is probably not going to be entertaining for other people unless you're interested in that thing, as I am, which I doubt, but still, again, I'm doing this for a kind of a documentation purposes. I'm documenting this thing, and then it will help me to look back at this and see how it works. And also, why not streaming? Why not stream it? Again, the whole point of AleksTabletops, not just the whole point of AleksTabletops, our AleksTabletops motto is pretty similar to Alex Connect's motto: experience games, learn from games, create your own, and share your experience. So what I'm doing is basically sharing my experience. So I'm experiencing studying Magic, and why wouldn't I share? If I find people who are interested in that and will watch it, awesome. If not, not that big of a deal. I mean, I'm doing it for myself at the end. So, and I'm happy with it. So each person has to find their own stuff, like why they're doing certain things. So again, I believe we have to share. We don't know how this information could help people in the future. Maybe right now it's irrelevant and no one ever going to see this, but at some point maybe this information might help someone, or at least it somehow, I don't know, inspires other people to do something on their own, which is the whole point of why I'm doing it. Besides the fact that I want to learn this thing on my own, of course, and create my own stuff based on that. So again, let's just call it at this. So the power and toughness thing, and also let's just take this. Also, ability, like also passive abilities of this permanent could be transferable. It's quite complex stuff, because I'm visioning it in a different way. Let me explain. So what I mean by that is, for instance, this enchantment, or no, so also passive abilities of that target permanent. Not the card that we're playing in order to create this effect, but the card that we're targeting. Also, passive abilities of target permanent could be transferable. What it means is, if this card has for instance, all creatures get +2/+2, something like this. So it could be just maintain and remain the way that it is. So for instance, if this card gives all creatures +2/+2, it will still give creatures +2/+2. But also we could transfer that into, kind of seems weird to transfer it into power and toughness. Oh, maybe it is. We can actually transfer it into power and toughness somehow. Like, we could leave it as it is, and or kind of transfer them permanently into power and toughness. So this is basically what I mean. This is just an idea. I mean, this is just the way that I think of it right now. It kind of seems pointless to a certain degree, but if you don't have any creatures, I mean, you might have, like, because sometimes the permanent state of the card is much more important than the buffed state of the card. So because of this, we might actually choose to set this permanently instead of. And by permanently, I mean, maybe we could, like, I mean, by permanently, I mean like +1/+ counter. Add them maybe as +1/+1 counters. It could be actually the case, because that way, even after this enchantment will die, this creature will still be on 2 power and toughness bigger than it was beforehand, which is actually pretty cool. Quite a interesting prospect to think about, but let's continue. I guess this is the only thing that I'm thinking about this at this point. As long as enchantment permanent isn't a creature. Now it's a creature. It's a creature. It's a creature, also same type of permanent as it was, with power and toughness each equal to the converted mana cost, where converted mana cost could be replaced with different card characteristics, such, again, set number, I don't know, ideally it has to be numerical. It has to have a certain amount of numbers, because without numbers it's probably not going to be possible to utilize this thing properly, but kind of still. Convert mana cost. So, to replace by different characteristics like set numbers, something like this, or different numerical characteristics. Let's just set the numerical right here by different numerical card characteristics. That's it. Good. So yeah, so far we went through only a couple of abilities. Continue. So yeah, so the next one again is Enchantment Aura. This card again creates a problem. Now it allows us to enchant a creature card in our graveyard. It basically targets a completely different thing. When it enters the battlefield, if it's on the battlefield, it loses enchant creature card in the graveyard and gains enchant creature put on the battlefield with animate that. Return enchanted creature cards to the battlefield under your control and attach to it. When animate leaves the battlefield, that creature controller sacrifice it. So there's a lot of kind of rules right here. The reason why those rules are established in order to not use this card in a cheaty way by constantly sacrificing this card with this enchantment that also still has enchant creature card in the graveyard, and that way we basically could reuse it multiple times. And instead of probably reusing it multiple times, we have a lot of text right here that basically doesn't allow us to use it multiple times. So my brain is exploding at this point. I don't know what to do with this mechanic. It's kind of confusing, and we don't have that much time till the end of the stream to work with it. Let's think. Enters the battlefield. So ideally it works like a regular enchantment, but instead of enchanting a creature, it enchants. Instead of enchanting a creature on a battlefield, it actually enchants a creature in a graveyard. So what we can do with this is find enchantments in general and add a lot of new information out there, and based on that, so enchanted target creatures, enchanted card loses abilities, so enchanted target creature card could be, yeah, we actually have this information, like enchanted target card, and card could be any permanent. Also let's add enchant a target card. Card could be anywhere. I mean, we just added that we could target a card even in our graveyard. It stays attached to a card until a card will leave a play or all the time. So enchant a target card. Card could be anywhere. So yeah, card could be anywhere, like graveyard, hand. Hand again seems kind of a weird thing. You have to see a hand in order to enchant a card from it, but still. Again, we could create our own rules, so there's no limitations. We could think whatever our mind is going to. Okay, so and gains enchant creature put into battlefield, and the rest is just kind of sets a limitation, because there's just a lot of complexity in here, which is not, I mean, after you put this card on the battlefield, it loses enchant creature from in a graveyard in order to not reuse it multiple times, and gains enchant creature put into the battlefield with this ability. So again, this is just the way this card is, like balances things. Like at the beginning, when it's like when it was printed, when animate enters the battlefield, if it's on the battlefield, it loses. No, printed. Yeah, we need printed. Oracle, this is kind of a based on a new thing, and the originally printed, this is it. Any creature in any graveyard comes into play on your side with 1 to its original power at the end of game, or if this enchantment is discarded without removing target creature from play, target creature is returned to its owner's graveyard. Target creature may be killed as normal. What the heck? Oh my god! Oh, I didn't understood any word from this thing. I mean, what it does? Oh. So, the type enchant that creature. Any creature in any graveyard comes into play on your side, which is regular stuff. I mean, like, this is the thing that I talked about. Anytime that card is printed for the first time, you have to, instead of explaining the general rules around this card, which is not don't exist yet, instead explain those rules in this card itself. So what they did in the card text of the original printed card is to basically try to create the first card in the Magic that was ever created that could enchant a dead creature. So because of this, they named it Enchant Dead Creature type. Later it became just a regular enchant aura with just the card text enchant creature card in your graveyard. So again, this is quite like drastic changes from the original, but at the same time, when the original was created, it was created for the purposes of setting the rules, just like establishing those rules at the beginning. And once we saw more cards like this, once Magic became much more like clear in terms of the rules and more cards start to like work together, they had to be renamed and completely reinvented, but at the same time maintaining the same type of action. So the action kind of stays the same. The reason is it explained differently. So because of this, printed cards are pretty complex and we're not going through them. They're just basically setting the rules for Magic, and for us it's much more easier to deal with Oracle. So yeah, like at the end of game, or if this enchantment is discarded without removing target creature from play, target creature is returned to its owner's graveyard, which is again regular thing when this one dies. Yeah, and target creature may be killed as normal. It's weird. It get me even more confused about this ability. Enters the battlefield. If it's on the battlefield, it loses its enchant creature card in a graveyard, because again, it's now only can enchant creature card enchant creature into the battlefield. Okay. Return enchanted creature card to the battlefield under control and attach an animate dead to it. When animate dead leaves the battlefield, that creature's controller sacrifice it. It kind of forces you to sacrifice this creature. No thanks. Oh, these complex things. So yeah, this ability is quite confusing. I don't know what to make out of it. I mean, I understand what it's doing. I'm having a hard time to generalize it, because there's just no way to generalize it. It's just too broad. I mean, it's just too... The only thing that I could take from it, that enchanted card loses all abilities or becomes weaker, yeah, that we just created a specific thing that works with the card type. So again, we could enchant a card, and card could be any permanent, and we also could enchant a card that also could be anywhere. And the only thing that we're going to establish that based on that, this card maybe has to have some restrictions, but I believe those restrictions could enter the play, will come to play at some point regardless. I mean, once the rules and how this card works will contradict the way it behaves, we will change this. So I'm not going to dive into this card. I believe it's just not worth it, because like, I understand what it does, but I still don't necessarily understand, like, for me, like, changing its ability to enchant creature put into the battlefield with this, it basically kind of a transitional action that avoids certain combinations being made, I believe. And since I'm not aware what type of combinations could be made to retrigger this card multiple times and return multiple cards from the graveyard right away, whatever, it seems for me like this is just a way to balance things out. That's it. So all this text is basically worthless to us, because it actually works like a regular enchantment. When animate date leaves the battlefield, that creature's control sacrifice it. Yeah, the only thing that it actually has right here, that if you will kill this enchantment, this creature also has to be killed. So maybe because of this enchant, creature put into the battlefield with animate death now becomes a text, because it kind of ties this enchantment to that card, and without this enchantment, card is just not going to survive, which is actually quite a unique take on it. So let's just add this one as a completely separate mechanic right here, because it's quite interesting. Snap. So yeah, we're going to keep everything as it is, because this, again, this ability has a lot of things. Enchant creature gets and becomes smaller. So again, there's a lot of restrictions. So if you want to return a card from your graveyard, you have to pay a certain price for it. I mean, first, if this card is gonna die, or if opponent will destroy this enchantment, the card also will die. So basically, creature cannot survive without... Oh, actually, everything's right. Without the enchantment. So this is the first thing. Creature cannot survive without the enchantment. Enchantment. This is the first specification. Second specification, so once enchantment leaves, creature had to be sacrificed. I'm just trying to explain this complexibility in specifications, and this is kind of it, because I don't know how to do it. Like, I don't want to generalize it, it's just the way it is. So yeah, creature cannot survive without enchantment, this is clear for us. And also, creature returns battlefield, weaker, which is again a regular logic. I mean, if you have an ability to return something from the dead, it has to have certain limitations from the original, and this card basically does exactly that. First thing that it's gonna do is it ties disenchantment to this card, and without disenchantment this card is not going to survive. And the second one basically makes this card weaker. And those are the only two things that I could extract from this at this point. Let's just move on. We'll go through a couple of more cards and we're probably going to finish the session. I don't want to make it too long. So again, I will try to keep them under an hour, so we already kind of passed an hour. So let's just go through a couple of cards until we'll get to another complex card. And we'll stop on this card and we will continue on Friday. So this set, as I understand, focuses on enchanting a different type of permanence, such as Enchant Wall, for instance. Right here, Enchanted Wall now can attack us through it didn't have Defender. We already basically covered that. So basically, this enchantment now allows this wall to attack. We covered that wall can become a creature if certain buff or enchantment will be used on it. So next one, artifact. Whenever land enters the battlefield, this one deals 2 damage to that land's controller. Kind of interesting thing, but again, it's just a regular action. I mean, whenever a land, like whenever something happens, this card deals 2 damage to the person that performed this action. So again, whenever a certain action is performed or whenever something happens, whomever performed this action gets punished, something like this. So it's basically just a regular thing. We mostly covered these type of abilities. So Armageddon, destroy all lands. Again, just a massive destroyer specific for a certain type of targets. As long as we have massive destroyers in general, which I don't believe if we have. Let's check them. So the beginning of your blah 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 and destroy all non-void permanents. We have destroy all there, but again it's too specific. Do we have just destroy? Seriously, we don't have any destruction in mechanics? Okay. So oh, I'm not searching in a proper way here. Destroy all. Yep, we have. So basically, destroy all, it's just, you can destroy all types of cards. It's basically a mass removal or board wipe, as they calling them. Now we know that this type of thing is covered, which is cool. Continue. Okay, artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a doom counter on Armageddon Clock. Something similar. At the beginning of your draw step, Armageddon Clock deals damage equal to the number of doom counters added to each player, and remove doom counter from Armageddon Clock. Any player may activate this ability, but only during any upkeep. I believe we already covered this card because it's too familiar. So basically what it does, again, it consists of multiple abilities. It consists of setting the start of this ability. The trigger of this ability is at the beginning of our upkeep. The one that basically controls this Armageddon Clock at the beginning of their upkeep puts a doom counter on this Armageddon Clock, and then at the beginning of your draw step, Armageddon Clock deals damage equal to the number of doom counters on it to each player. So basically this is a ticking bomb, or ticking Armageddon, and so remove a doom counter from Armageddon Clock. Any player may activate this ability, but only during any upkeep step. So again, only at the beginning, before the beginning of draw step. So if you will decide to remove a doom counter, so basically you have to pay additional price in order to stop this clock from ticking, which is actually a pretty cool thing. I don't know if I have this or not. We could generalize it just simply in case I don't have it in our, because it seems too familiar to me. Actually, it seems like I already have it, but I might not. And in case I don't have it, let's just add this one as a copy without changing anything. and establish a couple of specifications based on basically the ticking time bomb. Hopefully it's right. Ticking time bomb. You can pay, like, each player able to pay a price to slow it down. Yeah, each player able to pay a certain price, certain price to slow it down. Ticking time bomb. So basically, you all die at some point. Affects all players. One thing that you could work with this ticking time bomb cards is to keep them to go through the game a little bit faster and force the opponent into basically thinking. So for instance, the opponent that has lesser lives probably not going to be bothered by removing those the opposite. It will be bothered by removing those counters because it needs to prolongate the game and lose less life because he's getting, or she is getting, closer to dying, so to losing. So the other player who basically has the upper hand probably is not considered by working with this Armageddon clock. So because of this, it's basically kind of it basically creates an interesting situation, but in most cases it just basically makes the game a little bit faster and puts additional pressure on the game. So let's just set this one too, like the psychological effect makes the game faster and also creates a pressure for the player, for every player. Which is again usually not something that I'm putting as an information right here because it's not necessarily a specification, but when we developing certain amount of cards like this, the cards that I'm probably going to call it ticking time bombs, those cards has to have a certain psychological effect to them, and they not only will create a certain effect that will affect the player and will force the player to act differently, but it also basically makes the game a little bit faster and also creates a pressure for an opponent who is basically much closer to losing. So it's just kind of a balance thing. Whew. So yeah, let's just get a little bit, go through a couple of more cards and then we'll go into finish. So enchanted creature gets +X+Y, where X is a half of the number of forests you control, rounded up, down, and Y is the half of number of forests you control rounded up. So first we're rounding down the X and rounding up the Y. Quite interesting card. I don't know if I need this. I mean, I believe I already put this information right here when we worked with buffs. Yeah, target creature gets X+Y until end of turn or as an aura, where X is a half number of 4. Yeah, we actually covered the exact card. So as I said before, like, we actually going through revised cards that we already covered. So I don't remember all of them, but I remember some of them. So there is a good chance that we already covered Armageddon Clock, because it's again seems too familiar. But in the way that I covered it at that time definitely would be different from how I covered it this time. So then we could combine two pieces together once we will go through the drafts, and now it will become much more stronger potential ability, which is cool. Sacrifice an artifact, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So we have about like 10 minutes or so, and then I will wrap up the session. It's going to be 1.5 hours then. So black creatures get +1/+1, because again, we covered so not that many cards today that I want to just basically fast-pace this thing. So again, this one's just a kind of a permanent buff that gives all specifically colored creatures additional buff. Again, this one gives a buff to itself by sacrificing an artifact until end of turn. Just the land that gives 2 colors. Each player chooses the sorcery. Each player chooses a number of lands they control equal to the number of lands controlled by the player who controls the fewest. Okay, and then sacrifices the rest. And players discard cards and sacrifice creatures the same way. Pretty cool. So basically, it kind of triggers the whole thing with a board wipe. It's not necessarily a board wipe, but it's pretty similar. So again, each player chooses a number of lands they control equal to the number of lands controlled by the player who controls the fewest. So basically, again, the reason why it's called balanced, because it basically balances things up. One thing that I will make, though, I will probably create a specific card, a specific ability that we would call balance. Instead of putting this card as a separate ability, what I will do is name it balance as an actual mechanic, not as a card. And what this mechanic is gonna do is going to basically provide balance based on the board state. So depending on the board state, this is the way to generalize it. Depending on the board state, if some of the players are too far ahead, this card or mechanic basically balances things up. Based on one player that has most disadvantage. So this is the way that I would think about this kind of mechanic. So again, instead of thinking about this as one card that does one thing, because again, in this particular instance, it just balances one thing. Each player chooses a number of lands they control equal to the number of... no, it's actually kind of balances everything, I would say. And let's just create this one as a specific. The actual mechanic is going to be a specific. Each player chooses a number of lands they control equal to the number of lands controlled by the player who controls the fewest, because we need a comparison to this overall generalization. And then sacrifices the rest, and the players discard cards and sacrifice creatures the same way. So again, until the balance will take place, this will perform a certain amount of things, and we not necessarily could create this as one card. We could separate it on multiple cards. We could put this balance mechanic on certain type of permanence, and once this type of permanent enters the battlefield, it basically goes through the balance, which is interesting. For instance, we could create a land, and after this land enters the battlefield, it basically goes through the balancing act. So could be a mechanic tied to a specific permanent and triggered upon entering. Could be a mechanic tied to a specific permanent. So for instance, like land, creature, artifact, etc. And triggered upon entering. With discarding a card, it's a little bit different, but again, still the idea is there. So yeah, let's just call it a balance. So let's just slowly wrap up the session. Let's just go through a couple of more cards until we will end up with a complex card, and then we'll end the session. So basic mana doesn't untap during your untap step. Again, just doesn't untap. You can untap it by paying 3, and as a result you will get 3. Weird, but still. If you have a card that actually reduce the cost of activated abilities, you could actually take advantage of it. Regular blend. So again, just regular creature with bending. We already covered bending. This is just one of the oldest magic abilities that works like creatures will work as a group. Add 1 mana of any color. Oh, seriously, Birds of Paradise is that old? I thought the Birds of Paradise is not that legendary of a card. I mean, apparently it's quite legendary. I mean, it was in a lot of sets. I remember it probably from M12, from M11 or M10. I don't remember if I actually have the copy of one of those. But still, the cool thing is with Birds of Paradise is one of those cards that gives you mana of any color, so it's much more cooler to put those cards into any type of deck. So yeah, just card that gives you mana. So first strike, covered, protection from certain covered. As black-white enters the battlefield, choose an opponent at the beginning of the chosen player's upkeep. This deals X damage to that player, where X is the number of cards in their hand minus 4. Enters the battlefield, choose an opponent at the beginning of the chosen player's upkeep. It deals X damage to that player, where X is the number of cards in their hand minus 4. Don't believe that we need to cover it. Again, it's just a combination of multiple things. So it deals damage, again, as I said before, it deals damage, but then this damage is restricted by something and controlled by something. So it's just a regular damage dealer that you set a specific criteria to be utilized. So in order for this to happen, yeah, the X is gonna be minus 4 of cards in their hand. So this is the way to basically go with it. Not going to cover it. So enchanted creature has protection from black. This effect doesn't remove black word. Protection from black. Oh, this is actually an interesting thing. This effect doesn't remove black word. Guess why? Because this is a black word. So, I mean, because this card has a protection for black, it kind of could, you could assume that it could gain protection even from black name in itself, but this is just kind of a funny way, a segue, I guess, into a card name, which is pretty cool. So enchanted creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn, just to get a regular buffer. It's so freaking cool that I actually want to kind of put it out there. Let's add this into our protection thing. So definitely have protection. So yeah, we have protection of your choice. Oh, it's quite down. So protection of your choice from any in-game actions, permanents, spells, situations, types of cards, colors, or from any out-of-the-game actions, permanents, spells, situations, including from players of choice. So protection from die rolls, protection, that's a regular protection. The effect protection doesn't remove this enchantment from target on which it applied attached to it. If protection self-incriminated. Oh yeah, this is exactly it. So this effect protection doesn't remove this enchantment from target on which it applied, or attached to it if protection is self-incriminated. So in this particular instance with the black word, the protection is self-incriminated. Incriminating, which basically makes this black card, and now it has a protection from black, but it doesn't remove this thing from it because, again, this is just a self-incrimination. Whatever. Continue. Enchanted gets +1/+1. Covered. Counter target red spell against a specific colored counter. Specific color removal. Enchanted creature has protection from blue. This effect doesn't remove blue word. Again, the same. Swamp Walk. Covered any type of walks. Even created a couple of those, which is pretty cool. So sacrifice Bottle of Suleiman. Flip a coin. If you win the flip, create a 5/5 colorless Gene artifact creature token with flying. If you lose the flip, bottle deals 5 damage to you. Again, based on a flip coin, if you win a flip, you will get one thing. If you lose a flip, you will get the other thing. That's it. As easy as this. We covered most of the coin flips mechanics previously. Let's just pass that one. Target player draws X cards, regular drawer, based on paid additional mana. So, Brassman doesn't untap during your untap step. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 1 if you do untap it. So again, just sets a certain price to untap this creature, and it's going to be tapped every time unless you will untap it. Covered it. Enchanted creature has mounting walk. Again, every type of walks we covered, so skipping it. Untapped creatures you control get +0/+2. Again, specifies the buff itself. This is something that we actually didn't cover. Let's just quickly specify the buff. Let's just set the buff. So we have buff here, we have buff here. Creatures you control get additional perks buff for each specific card type in your possession in game. Let's just go through a couple of buffs because we have so many buffs in here. There's just like attacking and blocking, buff. No. We need to find a buff as an actual kind of ability. Yeah, this is more like it. So, creatures you control get additional perks buff for each specific card type in your possession in-game. Enchanted creature by aura, creatures by enchantment. No. Maybe let's just create a specific card that basically buffs. Buff. Permanent on temporary. Permanent or temporary. So permanent buffs, or temporary buffs are pretty clear. Those are those that triggered by instant and sorceries. Those are pretty clear. What we need though is explanation from temporaries, and we need to take this explanation from here because I quite like this. So untap creatures. So certain there's not that many things that you could do with the action of the card itself. So untap creatures, and we also tapped, which is weird. Why would you give your tapped creatures buff? But again, it might work for somehow. Tapped, attacking, blocking, enchanted, and etc. So basically, there's infinite possibilities how you could enchanted and etc. So there's infinite possibilities how you could like put this buff on the creature. Let's just set with this. Let's just go with XX. So this is one thing that we didn't cover so far. The way that buff could be affected. Let's just go effect of the buff. So effect of the buff, either permanent or temporary. So it could be basically be affected based on something. Based on, for instance, this criteria. Untapped, tapped, and etc. This is one thing that I believe we definitely need to add. A couple of more things and we're finishing. So add 1 mana of any color until simple. Until end of turn, anytime you could activate a mana ability, you may pay 1 life if you do add 1. So again, just to trade 1 resource for another resource, which is quite cool. I don't believe that we actually have this one. Let's see, target spell or permanent becomes red, just changing the color. Next time a black source of your choice will deal damage to you this turn, prevent that damage. The same for white, or for blue, for green, for red, for white. So yeah, let's just stop on this Cloaked Beast. So this is going to be the one card that we're going to stop with. And before we'll get back to the thing. Yeah, Cloaked Beast is the next one, or we'll continue with the Cloaked Beast. And let's just get back to this trade 1 resource for another thing. And just add this into general Magic abilities, because this is something that Magic has quite, utilizes quite often. We'll end up on a Cloaked Beast, we'll continue in the next session with it, so let's just find replace, trade. Could be removed, traded, no, yeah, we don't have that much of a trade in here, so let's assume that this is a frequently used ability. You have an ability to draw an additional card, you have the ability to return card, blah blah blah. Let's just add in right here, so as you have the ability to take an extra turn after this one, you also have the ability to trade 1 resource, like for instance in abundance. I don't know how the word actually is spelled. Let's just figure it out. Abundance, probably with A at the beginning. Seriously. Okay, to trade 1 resource in abundance to the other in scarce. So if you have, let's just check it in here. У вас есть возможность обменять один ресурс в изобилии на другой в панике. Ну, scarce, it's not necessarily guide. Scarce, scarce, it's not necessarily basically the opposite from abundance. We have abundance and we also have a scarcity. Scarce, it's probably scarce. Mala, yeah, that's it. So just a different phrasing, different spelling. What is it? Scarce and scarce. So hopefully it's gonna work better. Yep, you've seen it. That's it. So yeah, you have the ability to basically trade 1 resource in abundance to the other that you in scarce. So it's, for instance, usually life for mana, and we kind of semi-covered it. I believe I already covered it, kinda, but we still want to establish it as a frequently used ability because it might work. Life for mana, like, I don't know, discard for mana. Usually the most scarce resource that you have is mana, but sometimes it could be opposite. Sometimes it could be opposite. Seriously. Opposite. Or opposite. and the other different things. Again, you could go with the different things. Again, you could look at your resources, like everything that you have on a battlefield could become a resource. Resource can be any in-game anything in-game. It's truly the case. I mean, the creatures could be a resource, your life could be a resource, your cards in your library could be a resource, your cards in your graveyard could be a resource, anything could be a resource. The number of cards in your hand could be a resource, so everything could become a resource. So yeah, that's it. So we're going to finish on that note then. So again, on Friday we will continue, if nothing will change, we will continue with the Cloak Beast. Again, I didn't read it, it might be a super easy card to go through, but again, I just decided to stop on it just because it has a lot of text in it, and instead of just covering it, let's just finish on that note, because this session is already past required time. On that note, we will end this session. So, yeah, where we are. Let's go down to revised. Again, this is it for the session. Thank you for watching, thank you for being here, have a nice day or night, and see you in the next session. This Friday we will continue to study revised, and hopefully it's going to become go a little bit faster. So yeah, Buddy says bye, and I guess bye.